Hello and welcome to today's e-showcase. BIOSTYR enables award-winning Peirce Island WWTF to meet the City of Portsmouth, New Hampshire's nutrient removal goals. I would like to thank today's sponsor, Veolia Water Technologies, for sponsoring today's event. Today's presenters are Terry Desmarais. Terry is a city engineer and engineering supervisor for the City of Portsmouth. Mr. Desmarais is in charge of the engineering division within the Department of Public Works that generally manages development and implementation of the city's capital improvements program, oversight of engineering design and construction projects, coordination of new and redevelopment projects, and asset management. Larry Lee is product manager with Veolia Water Technologies. He has about 20 years of experience in water and wastewater treatment and related research, modeling, design, and product development. And now I hand the presentation to our presenters.
Thank you, Regina, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar. I'm going to give a very brief introduction of the technology, then I'll hand it over to Terry, who's going to share his experience with the BIOSTYR technology in his plant. So the BIOSTYR technology is a very unique technology. It combines elegance, automation, versatility, performance, space, and environment in one product. I know elegance is not something we particularly care too much about in our industry, but if you put the BIOSTYR and a conventional activated sludge plant together, you'll be comparing a swimming pool to a septic tank. If you lived close by, I'm sure you would appreciate the BIOSTYR more than the septic tank. Automation is another benefit of the BIOSTYR. It can be 100% automated, so you don't have to do a lot of manual control work. Versatility, the technology is very versatile. You can use it for BOD removal, you can use it for nitrification, and also you can use it for denitrification. It can be secondary, and also it can be tertiary treatment. The performance is good too. You can achieve BOD TSS in the 10 to 20 range, and you can achieve a total nitrogen limit of less than 3. In terms of space, the technology is very compact. It is typically 25% of a activated sludge process. Talking about environment, it helps clean up the environment, clean up our rivers and lakes. At the same time, it provides a great working environment for the operators and also the surrounding community because it's very neat, clean, odorless. This is a sketch of the BIOSTYR. Very quickly, so the water is pumped into the bottom of the treatment cell. It goes up, it combines with the air bubbles that gets released from the air grids. So the water, the air, they go through the media layer, which is floating on top of the treatment cell. As it goes through, it'll get biologically treated and also physically filtered. And once the water is treated, it goes through the slab, the nozzle slab, and it goes up to the second layer, which is what you see here as almost like clean water coming out of a well. It looks like a swimming pool. Now, a little bit more details. As you can see, this is a treatment cell. On the bottom is the distribution channel, air grids. You have support columns, and you have a supporting slab. The media will be floating against the top ceiling of the treatment cell. So for the regular BIOSTYR, you have the polystyrene media on top. For the BIOSTYR duo, you will have a layer of the K5 NBBR media. So the NBBR K5 media gives the BIOSTYR technology more treatment capacity. This is the media for the BIOSTYR and duo. The picture here is the polystyrene beads without biofilm, and on the left you're looking at the beads with biofilm. Almost looks like mung beans, if you if you will. The media is very light. Specific gravity is very low. As you can see, it's 0.05, and the specific surface area is very high. It's anywhere around 1,000 square meter per cubic meter. The K5 media for the BIOSTYR duo, it has 800 square meter per cubic meter of surface area. The specific gravity for the K5 media is a little higher. It's close to 0.95. Here are some pictures of the nozzles that we use for retaining the media. So the water will go through the nozzle, and the media will be retained in the treatment cell. So the BIOSTYR, as we talked about earlier, it can be used for in many applications. It can be used for just the BOD removal, or combined BOD and ammonia removal. It can be used for pre-denitrification, tertiary nitrification, or tertiary denitrification. Here's a table showing you the target treatment performance in terms of limit. Typically, we can reduce ammonia down to below 0.5, and we can reduce NOx to below 1. This is a quick picture showing an actual plant. As you can see here, there's a 100 MGD BIOSTYR next to a 100 MGD activated sludge process. As you can see, the footprint of the two are very different. The BIOSTYR is only about 25% of the footprint of the activated sludge process. Like we also talking about, if you are one of the guys who live right there, like as you can see those houses, you would appreciate the BIOSTYR probably more than the activated sludge process. Veolia has more than 170 installations worldwide. They range from 0.1 MGD to 400 MGD in capacity. And in North America, we have about more than 25 installations. So here's a map where they are. A lot of these are secondary treatment. Some of them are tertiary treatment. We do have pilot capacity. So if you guys are interested in looking into the technology, we can definitely provide the pilot equipment for any study if you're interested in. With that, I'll hand it over to Terry, who's going to share his experience with his plant. So Terry, all yours.
Great, thank you, Larry. I appreciate the introduction. And I will walk through the City of Portsmouth installation project, where we just recently put in a tertiary level biological aerated filter BIOSTYR, and just kind of discuss some of the challenges that it helped us overcome. Just quickly on the City of Portsmouth, it's a seacoast New Hampshire community located on the southeast side of the state of New Hampshire, right on the seacoast of the Atlantic Ocean, near the mouth of the Piscataqua River. We're only about 5 minutes from Maine and 20 minutes from Massachusetts. We're tucked right on the seacoast of New Hampshire. It's a historic community settled in the 1600s, incorporated in the 1800s, and is a tourist destination for the area. We can double our population in a day just based on tourists, and also workforce influx of people. We have within the limits of the city a converted Air Force base. It's now called the Pease International Trade Port. It's a pretty major economic hub for the area as well. As far as the city's infrastructure, we provide regional water distribution as well as regional treatment of sewage. So we treat all the wastewater from the City of Portsmouth, the International Trade Port. We have a few customers in the adjacent communities, and then there's a town called, another island to our east called Newcastle, and that is treated by the City of Portsmouth's wastewater treatment system as well. The collection system dates back to the 1800s, and just like many other New England collection systems, portions of it are still combined, and we have 3 permitted combined sewer overflows in our collection system. We have a separate storm drain system for those areas that are not combined, and separate MS4 permit that we're compliant with as well. City is unique in the area in which we are, because one, we're the only combined system in the watershed, and also we're the only community that has 2 wastewater treatment plants. The one that we'll be talking about today, where we did the biological aerated filter upgrade, is the Peirce Island wastewater treatment facility, and that's a 6.1 million gallon per day facility, and treats the majority of the city and those other customers. The only thing it does not treat is the International Trade Port. Trade Port has its own separate treatment facility. It's a 1.2 million gallon per day sequencing batch reactor that the city owns and operates. The City of Portsmouth sits within an estuary. So it's the Great Bay Estuary. It's in the National Estuaries Program, and like many of the estuaries in the country, the dialogue about eutrophication concerns and potential for nitrogen permitting has been going on for well over a decade here. The thing that's interesting, and as it relates to the importance of this project, was that we were in the planning phase and the design phase without a permit in place for nitrogen. So it wasn't actually till later on that the permit came into play as a final permit. So there's a lot of decisions that had to be made up front on the level of treatment, and you'll see what we elected later on in the presentation. But this is a major estuary. It has 52 communities that are in both New Hampshire and Maine, and within that area, there's 17 wastewater treatment facilities. So as it relates to the particular treatment facility, the Peirce Island wastewater treatment plant, the treatment facility was constructed in the 1960s, and it operated since 1985 under a National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit with a waiver from secondary treatment, referred to as a 301H waiver. It's one of the last few in the country. We operated under that permit until 2007, when we received a secondary level treatment permit, which we could not meet with our physical infrastructure. We ended up in a consent decree with the EPA. After some wastewater planning in 2012, we had a proposed plan to move forward with an upgrade at the Peirce Island treatment plant. They began construction with that upgrade in 2016. Were completed in 2021. And then, as I mentioned earlier in the last slide, it was not until 2021 that we actually received our permit for nitrogen. Actually, the entire estuary received a permit called the Great Bay Total Nitrogen General Permit. We'll show you how we comply with that in a future slide. The location turns out to be a very important part of the consideration for our selection of the technology. This here shows Peirce Island. So this is just to the east of downtown Portsmouth. For those who have visited Portsmouth, there's an area called Prescott Park. There's also a historic outside museum called Strawberry Bank. It's a spot that many people would go to. It's located just off to the left. So you have to drive down through historic downtown Portsmouth to get out to Peirce Island. You'll see on this picture here that there's a lot of recreational resources out on the island. We have a public boat launch, public pool, another island called Fortree Island, playgrounds, walking trails, off-leash dog walking area, and then you have a wastewater treatment facility at the very tip of the island. So this island being here, and as we looked at the need for an upgrade, one of the restrictions that was put on us by the city council early on in the project was to stay within the fence line of the plant once it was constructed. So the design team that included city staff as well as AECOM, who is the engineering consultant, had that major restriction placed early on. And you can see why that was difficult in this blown up picture. So this is a picture of the facility on the right-hand side prior to at the very beginning of construction in 2016. And the dashed line on the outside edges is the limits of the existing fence line at that time. So it's only about 3.7 acres. and we had to stay within that in the final configuration of the plant. Now, this, prior to being upgraded, it was a pretty simple facility, chemically enhanced primary treatment. You can see the two clarifiers in the center with the green hue around them, which are the launder covers. But we had a pretty simple system here. It was grit removal, chemically enhanced primary treatment. We used a ferric polymer blend to enhance settling, and then it was discharged to disinfection, dechlorination, and then out to the river. So it's a pretty simple system. As we're looking at an upgrade, however, we knew that we're going to have to be looking at high rate, small footprint technologies. And that's why we began a process in 2011 to do a pretty intensive technology selection pilot program. And our major goals here were to make sure, one, we could find a technology that could fit within the space constraints that were identified. We also wanted to confirm that, because these were not your conventional technologies, we could make sure to have reliable nitrogen removal. We knew that was coming down the line. We just didn't know exactly when. From a permit perspective, being concerned about that unknown, we want to make sure that we could maintain and meet the future treatment capacities, both from a nitrogen perspective as well as from a capacity flow perspective, design flow. And we also wanted to confirm that the loading criteria could be achieved that we were being told these different technologies could achieve for treatment. We started off, as I mentioned, this was the 2011 timeframe. We began with a list of different technologies and configurations that generally included the biological aerated filter, conventional activated sludge with numerous different configurations, one with ballasted flock using biomag. We looked at different MBBR configurations and also membrane bioreactors. What we elected after doing some initial desktop analyses was to construct on site some small scale pilots. And what you see here in the picture to the right is at that time, the Kruger BIOSTYR pilot. The first stage and second stage columns are in the foreground of this picture. Behind that's a series of tanks. Those tanks included a primary clarifier, which we used to mimic our primary effluent. And then we had two other technologies. We did an MBBR followed by DAF for the settling component. And we also did conventional activated sludge with the ballasted flock biomag and conventional settling. So at the conclusion of the piloting effort and data collection, we went through a weighted priority matrix. We identified a number of different evaluation criteria. Not all of these were monetary. In fact, you'll see at the bottom where the costs come into play. But we used our weighted scores of the evaluation criteria and both the capital and life cycle costs to come up with a value ratio. And the best ranked value ratio is the selected technology in terms of moving ahead. You can see on the evaluation criteria, this was not just performance related. There was a number of these that looked at things like operational track record, health and safety factors. We were interested in how these different technologies dealt with sustained wet weather events and cold water. So that was an item that we prioritized in this evaluation. And then lastly, one of the biggest was our ability to get from, a nitrogen limit of somewhere around 8 down to a nitrogen level as low as the limited technology, and somehow do that conversion with, of course, a minimal cost. So hopefully with no capital upgrades in the future. You can see that the BAF was weighted the highest, determined to be the best value ratio for the city. We presented this plan to the city council, and they elected to move forward with this plan in 2012. As noted, we had to keep within the fence line of the existing site, and this schematic here really demonstrates kind of just how tight it got. The site plan itself kind of morphed on and off throughout the process of design. This presents the final design. You can see the fence line shown there where the line says permanent fence. And of note is looking at the biological aerated filter building in the very back on the right hand of this picture. And you can see it really goes from fence line to fence line. Let's say if we had one sheet, we had a access corridor, which is that green dotted area that allows us access to the backside of the facility, and that's actually outside the fence line. But we were able to still move forward with our design in this configuration. It was very, very tight site. In terms of the upgraded design, we have added at the facility a number of unit processes. It was a very complicated construction sequencing project. We had to do, in addition to maintaining the existing facility during the course of the project and meeting permit, we had to relocate the staff. We had to do a temporary electrical system and had a number of temporary measures in place in order to actually construct this facility while the other one operates. The design flow of the plant increased from 4.8 to 6.1 million gallons per day. We maintained our peak flow for wet weather treatment at 22 million gallons per day. And we added, as I mentioned, a number of unit processes. Up until this point in time, the facility, because it was so basic, had no need really for influent screenings. So we added a screening building. We modified the aerated grit chambers to improve the hydraulics of those systems and the performance. Our primary clarifiers were not modified, but we actually went ahead and replaced the internals of those clarifiers prior to our larger upgrade. And from a functional standpoint, they did change marginally. We elected to co-settle our raw solids with our influent solids with the BAF backwash solids in the primary clarifiers. So they're doing a lot of work in the upgraded system. We do still have the opportunity to optimize settling with the use of ferric and polymer, and we elect to do that, or we do that as a matter of process during the course of wet weather events. As you can see, we added in the biological aerated filter, which is a two-stage system. The first stage does carbon removal and nitrification. We use micro C as a supplemental carbon addition in between nitrification and denitrification. And then we have the second stage denitrification system prior to being discharged over to disinfection and dechlorination. On the solid side, the co-settled sludges go through a gravity thickener to sludge storage, and then they're dewatered with belt filter press and discharged to a landfill. Just looking at the upgrade here, you'll see a picture of the biological aerated filter building. So this building is large. It's about 230 feet long. And in the back side, where you can see the two sets of cells, one on either side there, it's about 100 feet wide. The building itself is about 50 feet high from basement to the upper level here that you can see in the photo. 25 feet of it's below the ground. We had to take out about 8,000 cubic yards of rock in order to accommodate this building. So it sits in a big bowl of rock. And in between the two sets of cells is a large pipe gallery. So the flow into this facility is actually taken after the clarifiers. There's a set of pumps in the building that's in the center top of this photo that pumps it over to the first stage cells. Those first stage cells are on the left side of the photo and at the BAF building. What you're looking at the top of those cells is where the treated water would come out. There's actually a cell cover on there that prevents algae growth, but that's where your treated water comes out, goes through a center channel and gets distributed after micro C addition over to the second stage cells, which are the much smaller cells that you see on the right-hand side. Once the treatment occurs to the denitrification side of it, it's sent over to the chlorine contact tanks for disinfection, dechlorination, and discharged out to the river. This system does have a high level of automation, and that automation is really dealing with adjusting the flow to the different cells that are online, making sure that the loadings are appropriate, the number of cells online is appropriate, and then the backwash sequencing. So there's a lot of automation in our small rate, high footprint type technology like this. And as I mentioned, we discharge over to the disinfection side prior to discharge out to the river. So overall, the treatment facility changed dramatically during the course of this construction. It was a 4.5-year construction effort. It was probably over a decade of planning prior to that construction. The project cost for construction was around $75 million. Total project cost is over $92 million. That $92 million included the piloting effort, replacement of the primary clarifiers prior to this project and a number of other planning efforts that were done, like looking at other locations, which weren't selected. In terms of the performance, we've been very happy with what the facility's been able to produce. And this is really where you see the dramatic change that has occurred. So when you look at the photo to the right here, we have our raw wastewater, our primary effluent, and granted, this isn't in the enhanced form, but this is kind of the level of effluent that we discharged under a 301H waiver for a long time. You can see on the far right, which is the new BAF effluent, it's significantly clearer, and we've seen a significant reduction in the amount of pollutants discharged. So when we compare our prior to the treatment plant's upgrade versus after, for biochemical oxygen demand, we've reduced about 90%. So it's almost 2,600 pounds per day less. On the total suspended solid side, we're looking at about an 87% reduction, or about 2,000 pounds per day less. And then for total nitrogen, we have an 83% reduction, and that equates to about 600 pounds of nitrogen discharge less per day than prior to the upgrade. And you can see that here, just demonstrated in a graphical format. This here, on the graphs on the bottom are showing the average load in pounds per day. This is for biochemical oxygen demand. Our facility started up right around the beginning of COVID, so right at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, we conducted startup. We saw a pretty instantaneous change in BOD and TSS because of the filtering effect of the biological aerated filter, and the microbes grow quicker. So we're able to see a pretty quick response, and you can see here that soon after, within 2 months after startup, we were performing very well and exceeding the permit limit that we had of 30 milligrams per liter average day for the month. So by the time we had to be compliant in April of 2020 for BOD, we were down around single digits for BOD, and we had to be somewhere around 30 milligrams per liter. We saw something similar on the side of total suspended solids. So this, again, is the same graph for TSS, and by April of 2020, we were down just above 10 milligrams per liter for total suspended solids, which made us compliant with the secondary level of 30 milligrams per liter that we needed to achieve. On the nitrogen side, we did not have a nitrogen permit, but we did have some requirements in our consent decree. So we had to be meeting 8 milligrams per liter monthly average by June of 2020. And you can see here that the nitrogen removal lagged in terms of performance and reduction compared to BOD and TSS, and we expected that because we expected the nitrogenous organisms to grow slower. Plus, we were doing startup in a very cold time of the year. So this met what we anticipated, and by June of 2020, we were down at 7 milligrams per liter, and we have been generally between 3 and 5 milligrams per liter since. I mentioned earlier that we were getting the Great Bay Total Nitrogen General Permit, and that did eventually come to us. The city, we didn't know exactly what this looked like, but we did take a conservative approach in terms of designing the facility. So we saw earlier that we could barely fit the facility kind of within the fence line, but even with that building, we were able to identify a design basis of meeting 3 milligrams per liter at 10 degrees Celsius. So that provides us with a lot of flexibility in terms of meeting what is now this total nitrogen general permit. Turned out that our total nitrogen general permit ended up that we're getting regulated on a load basis for both of our treatment facilities combined. And this graph here shows you the performance as well as the limit. The dark blue bars are the pounds per day from Peirce Island, and the light blue bars are the additional pounds per day from the Pease wastewater treatment facility. And our limit together is that we have to achieve is 341 pounds per day on a seasonal rolling average basis, which is April through October. It turns out that there's no requirement for wintertime removal in this particular permit, the way it's structured, and the city has the opportunity to take advantage of credits if we're under the permit limits. And as we looked at while we didn't have to be compliant with the permit in 2021, we're able to look at what we would have achieved. And you can see in the the graph on the right, the yellow bars, we were between 150 and 180 generally pounds per day during the seasonal rolling average period, where we had to be at 341. So we're able to take, based on the way that the permit was structured and some of the voluntary components, we get to take a sort of credit for the amount of nitrogen we don't discharge. And right now we estimate that in the growing season, that's about 38,000 pounds per day less. And as we look at the off-season optimization that we can achieve with the biological aerated filter at Peirce Island, we estimate in an annual basis we could get we could take a credit between 50 and 70,000 pounds of nitrogen per year. So we're getting great performance from the facility. Just to summarize, we had in terms of the major issues that we had to address at this particular facility, first and foremost was trying to find a technology that fit within the limits of the existing fence line. After piloting more than once, we were able to determine that the biological aerated filter fit within the space constraints. And then further, it offered us the opportunity, without any future capital upgrades, to be able to go to lower limits. And that was a big, important factor in our selection for the city. So really just being able to hit this unknown at the time during planning for future nitrogen, and then being able to minimize our potential risk of future upgrades was really what drove the city for this. And we've been successful in our selection, and it's allowing us to take great credits in terms of the permit at this time. With that, I think we will conclude.
All right, this is great. We actually do have a few questions in our chat. And people, please remember, if you want to ask a question, go ahead and select the everyone option in your to field in the chat module and send us a couple of questions. But for now, we're going to go ahead and start out with our very first question, which is there only a post-denitrification or also a pre-denitrification in the first BAF stage?
I can take the first stab of that, and maybe Larry can follow up. So the configuration of the bath has carbon removal and nitrification in the first stage, and then denitrification. There is no return or recycle like you'd have in a conventional activated sludge facility. The amount of denite that we want to achieve is really a function of the amount of micro-C that we use between the two stages of treatment. Larry, I don't know if you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, Terry. Excuse me. We can design pre-denite. If you have like a high BOD coming in order to take advantage of that BOD, we can design something like a pre-denite with the return recycle of the stream.
All right, so we've got another one that is, what was the effluent concentration for the 83% nitrogen removal?
So we were calculating that based on pre and post data, and we're achieving somewhere in the range of about 3.5 to 4 milligrams per liter when we're calculating that 83% removal.
What is the media replacement rate?
Terry, you want to comment on that, or you want me to comment on it?
Go ahead, I can add after Larry.
Okay, so basically you do not need a media replacement. We have installations that's been running for more than 20 years in the US. They do not require media replacement.
And we've seen, we've been tracking media. Of course, there are occasions where you have very small amounts of media that escape, but nothing that rises to the point where you have to actually replenish the media.
Okay, great. Is primary treatment required for BIOSTYR?
Larry, you want to take that one?
Sure. Primary treatment, mainly it's on the TSS. So we typically want the TSS coming in to be under 150 milligram per liter, because if you have higher TSS coming in, it would increase the backwash frequency. So ideally, we require a TSS concentration of less than 150. Whether that's achieved by primary treatment or some sort of screening, either way, it doesn't really matter. As long as you keep the TSS lower than a certain range, that should be okay.
Okay, our next question is, how deep are the tanks overall? If very deep, it seems that discharge pressure on the blowers, compressors, might be a design issue.
I think I can just answer the standard depth is about 15 feet, I believe, from the nozzle deck down to the base of the tanks. So it's not significantly deep. I did mention earlier that our building is 50 feet high from top to bottom. Part of that's because we are so constrained with the site. We put the mud wells, which are for the backwash of the biomass, underneath the tanks. So that's part of the reason why we have such a deep facility.
Okay. What does the nutrient credit work? Does it apply to the following year or sell it?
I wish we knew. There's in terms of the way that the Great Bay Total Nitrogen general permit was set up, there are two parts to it. One, we have strict limits for the effluent of the treatment facilities that we need to meet. And then there's a voluntary component which integrates stormwater and non-point source controls. So we get to demonstrate to the EPA that we are taking efforts in multiple different paths. So the city's approach to compliance is to take credit for significant reduction at our point sources at the treatment plants, as well as taking credit for some of the work that we do on the non-point source and stormwater point source discharge for nitrogen. There's no traditional or no formal crediting program at this time, but we're working with the regulators to see if we can incorporate that.
Has the BIOSTYR been used in industrial application? Any sulfate reductions?
I'm sorry, in what reduction?
Sulfate? Any sulfate reductions?
I don't think so. The BIOSTYR is mainly for nitrogen removal. In terms of P removal, it'll be able to remove some due to phosphorus uptake, but it does not particularly remove phosphorus. If you wanted to remove phosphorus, you can always put a disc filter in the back somewhere to remove phosphorus.
Okay. We've got one about operating costs. What are the typical operating costs?
So I know, I'm not sure if Larry could answer that or not, but I know for our facility, it was a kind of unique in the sense that we upgraded from chemically enhanced primary treatment, which was pretty low energy, to a tertiary level facility. So in our budget, we saw about $1 million impact annually, but that was a very significant change in terms of level of treatment. I don't know if you have more generic curves, Larry, that you could offer or thoughts, but that's kind of how the city addressed it.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and at the same time, it's difficult to answer. But if you looked at Terry's numbers, you can notice the capital cost for the BIOSTYR may be a little higher, but if you looked at the life cycle cost, actually the operational cost could be lower for the BIOSTYR just because you don't need as many operators to operate this process. So in the long run, actually twofold. One is labor savings. The other is aeration savings, because compared to other technologies, the BIOSTYR is very compact. Even though you are using, it's a high rate system, right? You're trying to achieve a lot of removal in a very limited space. But because of the space is lower, a lot of times we found that the aeration energy used by this technology is actually lower than some other technologies. That's why when you look at the life cycle cost between the between the BIOSTYR, the MBBR, the activated sludge plus biomag, they're actually pretty close. That means the BIOSTYR actually is a little cheaper to operate.
Okay. And our next question, I'm going to take a stab at this. How much micro C is added, IB/IBN?
So this is referring to pounds per pound of nitrogen. I don't have that number off the top of my head. I know that we do look at a certain dosing rate of gram per gram, and if I recall, it was somewhere around 6, but I would have to double check that with the operators. We add in our system about 400 gallons per day of micro C, so it's a significant cost for the plant, and our selection of micro C was made at the design level in order from a health and safety standpoint, so we weren't hauling methanol or another explosive chemical down through downtown Portsmouth on the way out to the facility.
Okay. The next question is, from the matrix, the BAF is the best operation and other factors we consider? Yeah. Let me try to read that again. From the matrix, the BAF is the best operation, and maybe that should be any other factors were considered. And Zha Zhang, if I'm reading that incorrectly, you can re-chat it for me.
Yeah, and our weighted, so actually, if I could go back and just answer that last question real quick, we are currently at 5.6 grams per gram for micro C addition. Just got confirmation from our folks. So anyways, in terms of the matrix, there were a number of different factors. The key ones were really, could we, which one performed the best was important, which one, the health and safety was an issue. And as Larry mentioned, the system's pretty safe from that perspective. Ability to treat long-term. And again, when we were designing it, we did not know what the nitrogen limit was going to be, and it was going to be the driver on the size of the facility. So we almost had to back into it to some degree and say, okay, what can we fit on site? What level of treatment can we achieve with the facility that we can fit on site? And what does that offer us long-term if the permit limit is something lower, like limited technology? So those were kind of the major items that weighed into the matrix and resulted in us selecting BAF. And then the cost obviously came in as we looked at the kind of the value ratio.
Okay, we are coming to the end of our time. I'm going to give you one more question. There is contact information on the slide in front of you where you can reach out to our panel and ask additional questions, and I will be providing them with these questions that have not been answered so they can possibly reach out to you and respond to those. But our last question for the day is going to be, what was the influent concentration of ammonia?
So our influent concentrations between 15 and 25 milligrams per liter. And it does swing based on wet weather conditions. So that's one of the things that we tested a lot during the pilot phase of the effort.
All right, perfect. This was great. We are at the end of our 45-minute session, and I'd like to take this time to thank Larry and Terry for a great presentation. Obviously, there were plenty of questions that I'm sure they'll be able to get to once we're done here. So thank you for a great presentation, and thank you to Veolia for sponsoring today's event. This actually concludes today's eShowcase. Thank you all for attending as well. The recording will be available at webfiresguide.wef.org. We will send all registrants an email tomorrow with this link. And please visit our event calendar to sign up for future events. Thank you all.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Have a great afternoon. Appreciate it. Thank you. Bye.